Right, so yeah, I'm going to do a summary of a simul that I did in the Morra Gambit, and this was the second edition. So I analyzed all the games from the first version, and then I hope maybe I learned something. And also after this second edition, I definitely learned some stuff that the computer pointed out. And I really like the idea of trying out this kind of openings in simuls because you get so many different responses that you wouldn't expect otherwise. Yeah, I should really do the stream. I was in Op Studio, but I guess I have to do the stream from Lichess. It's a little bit more efficient. I realized I cannot move around the pieces from Op Studio. Yeah, so we're gonna have a look at the first board. This was Dishul 1967, quite a high-rated player. And so we're gonna check what happened in this game. This was knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop e2. So this is the original choice. I don't think I saw this move in the first simul. And the bishop e2 is a little bit slow compared to bishop c4, which is the most active choice. And the computer suggests that black should play a line with g6, bishop g7, something like this, g6, bishop g7, knight f6, and then just castle short. And white has very little compensation for this pawn. So basically when you sacrifice this pawn in the Morra Gambit, the position basically demands that you need to play active. And I don't really think that bishop e2 is what the position needs from white's perspective. So in this game I played knight f6, castles, e6. Let's see. Bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, knight h5, knight d4, knight takes g3, h takes g3. So this maneuver is something that the computer appreciates when black tries to hunt this bishop down with h6, g5, knight h5, and just removing this bishop. And I think it's all connected to the idea that black should try to play for the dark squares. And by trading one of the knights for this dark squared bishop, so black increases his control of the dark squares. And this means that basically from this point on, black is left with an unopposed bishop on the dark squares. So he will always have a possibility to take control of these squares. And this is something I played in several games, and I also checked with the computer, and he really likes this idea of playing this maneuver. So yeah, this move I played basically to avoid the complications of a knight landing on b5, because obviously if black plays bishop g7, then this pawn on d6 is going to be a little bit vulnerable or weak. So this is why I decided to play a6. And I think from this point on, it's yeah, I think we covered all the essentials from an opening perspective. And the best choice from the start was probably at this point. I think e6 is reasonable, but the best move is probably already here to play this maneuver with g6, bishop g7, knight f6. So in general, I think it's a good idea for white to play this kind of fianchetto on the king side against most Sicilians. there are exceptions, and there is this Yugoslav attack in the dragon, which is quite dangerous for black. But otherwise, I mean, if you play the Najdorf, you basically, it's very difficult to move to a position of the dragon. But when you play knight c6 in the Sicilian very early, then you still have this option, especially in this situation. Whenever white plays bishop e2, of course this is a gambit, so it's a little bit different, but in general, if white plays bishop e2 after knight c6, I think it's perfectly fine to move over to dragon territory with g6, because there's no longer any kind of Yugoslav attack. We're going to move on to game number 2 with Emmanuel or Steffi. And yeah, hi Steffi. So what happened in this game? It was knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop c4. All is basically main line in the Morra, this bishop c4. So black plays a6, short castle, knight f6. So in this game Steffi played a4. And there was a famous game in 1972. It was one of the founders, Ken Smith. He was playing against Mecking, Enrique Mecking, I think, a Brazilian player. This was in 1972, but in that game, white played a3. He played this move, but he never really followed up with b4. That looks a little bit logical here. If you want to play a3, maybe you want to play b4 next. So he never played b4, and Smith actually had to resign in only 19 moves. And this was the same tournament where he lost very badly to Larry Evans. And that game has actually become the foundation of this setup that I'm employing, this a6 move. And I don't feel that a4 in this situation is really a dangerous try against black setup. It's more of a wait and see approach. I guess it takes away this option of b5, and maybe there is some idea of trying to play a5 and securing this square b6. But otherwise it's also cost a little bit of time to play a4 here. So here I played bishop g4, and maybe a more solid choice is to leave the bishop here to protect b7. I had some incidents when I play bishop g4 and white tries to go queen b3 and stuff, but I guess maybe playing e6, bishop e7 and short castle, and I think black is perfectly fine, very solid position. But I played bishop g4, h3, bishop takes, queen takes, knight e5, queen e2, and I took and white took. So the computer really doesn't like this kind of maneuver, and I've seen it in a number of games where I try to do this, where I take on f3 and I go after this bishop on c4. But I thought that maybe I'm reducing white's chances of getting a kingside attack if I remove this bishop. But so Steffi has some problem with the network. I hope it's working. So I thought I was going to reduce the attacking potential for white by taking off this light squared bishop, but it seems the computer really liked this knight on c6. So in many cases he actually plays bishop g4. He thinks it's okay to take on f3, but then he just wants to keep the knight on c6 and play e6. Usually there is a bishop on c4, and whenever you play e6, this bishop is just blunted, and black keeps fighting for these dark squares. So I will remember this kind of evaluation by the computer. So I will stop doing this kind of trades with the knight, because I understand it's not really the optimal way of handling the position. So yeah, rook c8, queen e2, queen c7, bishop g5, queen c4, rook e1, and there was a draw offer, and I immediately took this draw offer because it's a simul. So if I can get some games out of the way early, I think it's to my benefit to do it, because I will save time on so many other boards by playing an early draw. Okay, so we move on to the third game, and let's see what happened in the third game. Knight f3, d6, bishop to c4. This is the main line basically so far. a6, short castle, knight f6, queen e2. So in this game I played e6, but the computer thinks that bishop g4 here is fine. There is no longer any possibility for the queen to go to b3 to harass the b7 pawn. And also white spent a little bit, he spent a tempo putting the queen on e2. So if you go bishop g4 and take f3, then basically white is going to spend two moves, queen e2, and then he's going to take on f3. So this small finesse is a reason to play bishop g4 here. And afterwards, just like I mentioned before, if white plays h3, then you just take, and you shouldn't go knight e5, which I've done in many cases, but you should just play e6 here, blunten the bishop, and black is just fine. So the valuation here is minus 0.7. So there is not much compensation for the pawn that white sacrificed. Instead, I didn't understand this subtle nuance in the position, so I played e6, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. Once again we see this idea that black can use with the g5 and then hunting down this bishop. So Stockfish definitely likes this maneuver, so whenever I get the chance I will do this. And so black with this maneuver, he managed to get a little bit of control of the dark squares, and the most important dark squares in this position is the central squares d4 and e5. So a very natural way of handling the position is to understand that this knight is our prime, this is the prime defender of the dark squares in the center. So this knight we really need to keep an eye on. And in this game I played g4 to drive this knight away from the central squares. And now knight e5. This maybe it was a little bit rash to play knight e5 immediately, because I think h5 needs to be played anyway. So choosing between knight e5 and h5, maybe I should have kept the knight a little bit longer, because as soon as I jump to e5 there is ideas for white to try to, well, of course he needs to defend the bishop, but as soon as this bishop moves he can start trying to exchange the strong knight on e5. But if I play h5 first, I think the knight is quite well positioned here, because it still controls the squares. h5, maybe bishop g7, maybe b5, maybe knight e5, something like this. But okay, knight e5, bishop e3, h5, knight e3, bishop g7, knight takes e5, bishop takes. So this bishop is really strong, and even if white wants to sacrifice an exchange, he wants to maybe give a rook for this bishop, it's not easy to do because it's also shielded by this pawn. So this is a powerhouse, this bishop on e5, and you have really strong control over the dark squares in this position. So rook d2 was played. h4 is a pawn sacrifice, but black was already up a pawn, so it doesn't really matter if you give this pawn back. And the computer agrees with this sacrifice. And queen f6. So white is starting to having some issues on the king side, with this pawn on g3 being quite annoying. And he immediately made a mistake here with rook f1, which is punished by bishop d4. And yeah, this costs white some material, because the king can't defend this rook anymore because of this check. Rook takes, queen takes, king h1, queen e5. So black has a winning edge from this position. So looks really nice with the central queen that has taken the place of the bishop and doing a terrific job. So yeah, we're going to move on to the next game. So this was table 3, and then we go to table 4. This is against Juba, 1700. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Knight c6, knight f3, d6. Yeah, bishop e2. That's interesting choice. And once again, it's not the most active placement of this bishop. I think c4 is the optimal placement, where you get this very active diagonal. But bishop e2 stands a little bit in the way, because maybe someday white wants to push the e5 pawn, and maybe he wants to have the queen here to support the pawn push. But with the bishop on e2, yeah, it's a little bit passive. And the best reply here, as I pointed out in the first game, is just g6, bishop g7, knight f6. In this game I played a6, which is a natural move. It's one of the key moves in the Evans defense, but bishop e3, knight f6, queen b3, e6, short castle, and bishop e7 is actually quite a mistake. It looks like a very natural move, but the problem is that bishop b6 is going to be very embarrassing for black, because this bishop is taking away the square. So if white plays bishop b6, you have to go to queen d7. So you can't use d7 for the knight, and you can't use it for the bishop, and black's pieces gets bundled up in a not a very gracious way. So my opponent was nice, so he played rook d1. He didn't go to b6, so I got a chance to move the queen away. And now when he plays bishop b6, I have this, I don't have a lot of space on the queen side, but at least I got queen b8, rook ac1, knight d7, trying to immediately handle this situation with the bishop on b6, knight a4. So here I decided to take on b6, but the computer shows that you can possibly try to improve the position before you deal with this bishop. And he or she suggests that you should play short castle and then maybe even bishop d8. So this is a very patient way of playing. Unfortunately, I got very nervous when I see this piece on b6, so I decided to, it was just too close to my queen side. I didn't have any space, so I decided to take. And yeah, this position is still quite bad for black, I feel. Let's see the valuation here. Yeah, it's not a good position. So I would definitely recommend to any black players who faces this bishop e2 that you should consider this schematics with g6, bishop g7, knight f6 against this move. All right, we're going to move on to the next game. I'm not going to look at the games in details. I just want to show the openings and what worked and what didn't work from the opening perspective. So this is game number 5. Knight c6, bishop c4, d6, knight f3, black plays a6. This is basically the main line so far. Short castle, knight f6, bishop f4. This is a very interesting move, suggested by, I think his name is Mark Esserman. He wrote the book Mayhem in the Morra, where he suggests this setup. e5 is supposed to be a mistake, and white can play knight g5, so it's a very critical line. And then I think this move is interesting, this e takes f4, giving up the rook on h8, queen e7, knight takes h8, knight e5, hitting the bishop on c4. White needs to protect this bishop. He goes bishop e3, and then I play g6. I think I had this position in the first simul as well, so maybe my opponent looked at that game and got some inspiration. It's a very interesting position. White played rook c1. I continued bishop g7. Computer also suggests a line with bishop d7 here, which is interesting. Showing a little bit more patience. Maybe that's a way that I can improve my game, to be a little bit more patient. So knight d5, knight takes, queen takes, bishop c6, queen. Yeah, this is a little bit crazy line. I don't know exactly if it's supposed to be good, but looks a bit nuts. So I played bishop g7 in this game, and I did a mistake in my first simul when they played this move, knight d5, and then I learned that I really need to take this knight. I need to exchange this knight as soon as it jumps to d5. So I did improve my game a little bit. Bishop takes h8. So rook b8 was probably better, because in this case, if I take, there is a dangerous move with rook c7, I believe. This move is a little bit dangerous, and I can't really take it because queen g8 check. And this might be a draw for white if he takes on h7, and the queen is blocking my king, so yeah. Yeah, that's probably not the best, right? I mean, if I go here, then here, yeah, I don't know. I don't like this too much. So from this point, you are supposed to play rook b8 is an improvement for black. And if queen g8, then just queen f8. Yeah. So that's maybe an improvement. Right, so I took here, and I took immediately on h8, and then queen g8 check, queen f8, queen takes h7, queen g7, queen h4. So white is basically doing a good job. He's picking up some pawns here, but here is a mistake. So all the games that I've seen in the Morra Gambit, as soon as the queens come off, the valuation really goes down, because black doesn't have the counterplay, and he sacrificed some material. So yeah, from this point it's basically -2. So I would say it's a clearly better position for black. It's almost winning, I guess. So I'm gonna have some tea here. I almost forgot that I had tea. Let's see. So which game? This was game number 5, right? And we are at move 16. Yeah, so after this queen trade, there is not really anything from an opening perspective. It was a very exciting game, but then the queens came off and black had a big advantage. And there were probably improvements on both sides, but white should really try to avoid the queen trades in this line, I believe, in general. We're going to move on to game number 6. Let's see what happened in game number 6. Bishop b5. I think this happened also in the first simul, and it's not a very challenging move. it doesn't give black any problems, because whenever you put the bishop on b5, it basically invites trades, and white doesn't really need any trades when he sacrificed the pawn. So I went to d6 here, knight f3, a6, asking this bishop a question, bishop a4, bishop d7. Now there is already tension between those light squared bishops, and there is a high likelihood of a trade, and that's not going to favor white. Bishop f4, knight f6, a3. I played e5 here. So here probably also g6 is a good idea, maybe g6, bishop g7, short castle, and I think black has a perfectly fine position. Just have to be careful about this break with e5, but as long as this move doesn't work, then black should be fine. So I played e5 myself, and then bishop g3, bishop e7, bishop e3, short castle, b5. Yeah, it looks like this position has a lot of, it's not a very solid position from black's perspective, you know, giving away this field on d5. So there is some weakness in the position, but at least black has this extra pawn. If you look at the valuation, it's minus 1.2, so the computer thinks that white has basically no compensation here. The game continued knight d5, and I decided to take this nice unprotected pawn on e4. If I can get away with it, it's something I try to do. Rook e1, taking the bishop on g3, bishop e6, threatening to trade more pieces, bishop c2, rook a8. Yeah, so black is up 2 pawns. It's a winning advantage after, yeah, after the opening phase, so there's not much to see from this game. And this was game number 6, so we're going to move on to number 7. We're going to see what happens in game number 7. Knight f3, d6, bishop c4, main line. Black plays a6, h3 is a new try, haven't seen that. So basically h3 takes away bishop g4, but it's also costs a tempo to play this kind of move. And in some games I play bishop g4, in other games I play e6. So whenever white plays h3, my choice is very simple. So I basically need to play e6. In this game something else happened, so I went knight f6, bishop f4. Maybe e6 is a more solid choice here. Let's see what the computer thinks. Oh, actually computer agrees with my choice of e5. But this is a loss of a tempo, this h3 move. So bishop g5, bishop e7, knight d5. And again, I see this undefended pawn on e4, so I decide to go for it. This situation is a little bit more complicated. I need to calculate some lines with... I remember I calculated this line with knight takes e7, and I plan to take on g5. If white takes on c6, attacking my queen, I have this in-between move, knight takes f3. And I think that kind of a position is quite nice. So, but here white played queen a4, and I didn't play the best move here because I felt this queen a4. I didn't. It was a surprise, but I also saw that if I play bishop d7, then bishop takes f7 and queen takes e4. I didn't like it too much, but anyway, I played bishop d7. But when I looked with the computer, he suggested this very nice king f8. And then the queen a4 check doesn't do anything. So I lose my right to castle. But I got 2 pawns more, so I don't have to worry too much about it as long as I don't get a kingside attack or something. So if I play king f8 and he tries bishop takes f7, how is that position actually? Let's try this. What happens if he takes here? What is the evaluation? Ah, I got this. I thought yeah, knight c5 is really nice. And you really want to take this guy. So if he plays queen c4, b5, and now he cannot protect this bishop anymore. So that's really nice. So this is why bishop takes f7 is not working. So anyways, I play bishop d7. He took. And then this move. Knight f5 hitting the queen. Queen h5 check. g6. Yeah, once again the queen gets traded. And the valuation is quite clear. It's a pawn up for black in an endgame. Bishop c6, there is absolutely no problem. Clear advantage for black. So we're going to move on to the next game. And this is game number 8. Let's see, knight c6, knight f3, d6, bishop c4, main line, a6, short castle, knight f6, bishop g5. I wonder why I didn't play h6 here, but of course then maybe black or maybe white can take on f6. So let's play this first. And white immediately took on f6. So this is something that I've been trying to do in a lot of games, gaining dark square control. And here white basically gives this control to black for free. So I just take back with the queen, queen e2, bishop e7, a3, short castle, queen e3. So here I play a little bit of a strange move, I guess. I play this queen h6. Looks a little bit strange because I'm basically giving white an opportunity to spoil my structure on the king side. But I'm also a pawn up, so if the queen comes off, there's a lot of counterplay that white is not going to have in an endgame. And also, it's not very easy for white to target this isolated double pawns because this is on a dark square and white doesn't have a dark square bishop. So I guess this one is pretty safe. All I need to do is play king g7 and it's protected. So b4, b5, bishop d3, bishop e7. Black is perfectly fine. The position is minus 1.8, so there is really no compensation for the pawn here. And yeah, position looks fine for black here. So we're going to move on to game number 9. So let's see what happened in this game. Bishop c4, a6. Short castle, knight f6, bishop g5, e6, queen e2, h6, bishop f4, g5. Yeah, bishop e3. I'm sure this is a better move because if white puts his bishop on g3, then black is definitely going to try to take off this bishop from the board. So bishop e3 is a better move. Knight g4, still trying to get this bishop, but white senses that this is dangerous, so he plays bishop d2, which is a good move. Knight ge5, bishop b3. So here I do the same kind of mistake that I've been doing for that session, because I didn't really know it was a bad idea. So I take this knight, and then I jump to d4 and I take this bishop. So this is not a good maneuver by black. If we look at the valuation here, it's still slightly better for black, but black is a pawn up. So if the computer says minus 0.3, it means that white has maybe 0.7 compensation or something. If there was no compensation, it would be just minus 1, but there is some compensation here. So in this situation, probably, maybe, I don't know, bishop g7 or something. Bishop g7, yeah, bishop g7, trying to go b5, playing queen e7, maybe bishop b7 or something. Yeah, something like this would be better. So I'm going to try to avoid this kind of maneuver to take the bishop, take this bishop in the future. The computer is not scared of this bishop at all because this pawn barrier seems to be holding up quite well. Right, so we're not gonna, yeah, from this position I don't think it's a lot to look at from a theoretical perspective. We're gonna move on to game number 10. So let's see what happens in that game. Yeah, bishop c4, main line, a6, short castle, knight f6. Yeah, bishop f4. This is the recommendation by Mark Esserman, e5. Again, this interesting line. I take the bishop, knight takes f7, queen e7, knight takes, queen e5, queen b3. Right, so queen b3. I don't think queen b3 is critical. And I play g6. The computer suggests g5 here because the queen doesn't have any access to the squares on the king side because he put the queen here, and then computer thinks g5 is a more active choice than to play g6. So yeah, I play g6 here, and rook a d1, bishop g7 looks logical. Knight d5. I've learned that I really need to take this knight whenever it jumps in this line. Yeah, bishop takes, queen b6. There is a beautiful idea here. I played queen d8 because I really like the queen trades, and my opponent just took, and I think black is fine. But there was a nice idea here that I missed, that I could try to play f3. And maybe white doesn't want to take. Let's say he plays something neutral. Maybe he plays bishop b3. So here is a really nice move for black. It's not that easy to see it, but actually black can play bishop h3. And he puts a lot of pressure on this pawn. And the reason that this is possible is that if white takes this bishop, you got this queen g5 winning on the spot. So that was really nice move, or a really nice idea actually. Bishop h3, I don't think I've seen this kind of idea before, so this was interesting. But of course I didn't see it, so in the game I played something else. I didn't even play f3 actually. I played queen d8, which is more of a chicken move perhaps, but it's, if the queen gets off, the position is quite good. So here black is just winning. This is a minus 2.9 evaluation. Very good position for black. We're gonna move on to game number 11. Let's see what happened in this game. So in the first simul, there was a couple of players who just gave up after 5 or 6 moves, but this simul was really tight. There was a lot of interesting games played. Okay, b3 looks like white is preparing to develop his dark square bishop. Also takes a lot of time. And we've seen in many games that white is trying to back up his bishop whenever it's threatened, but here he can't really. I mean, if I would play b5 in some position, the bishop would be forced to a more passive square perhaps. So I don't believe in b3 too much. Bishop g4, rook e1, e6. Yeah, bishop h5 was a better move here. I decided to take, and yeah, what is the best move here? It's actually queen e2, Right, so this maneuver isn't great, but here after queen d1 I was a little bit lucky. My opponent should have played queen e2 to cover the bishop. So here I just take on c4, and this time this kind of situation is really good for black because this isolated pawn on a light square is not very easy to protect. So I just play rook c8 immediately, queen a4. Yeah, got the trade of queens, and totally winning. -6. Yeah, that's a good position. So we're gonna go to the final game on table number 12. Let's see what happened in this game. Yeah, bishop d3. This is also one of those moves that are putting the bishop in a not very active. I think e2, b5 are not very good squares, and also d3. Those three squares are not great for this bishop. So knight f6, short castle. Maybe here I should have played g6, I'm not sure. Yeah, g6 is often a go-to move whenever white plays those passive moves. Bishop e2, then g6, bishop d3. g6 is also important, but I played e6, rook e1, bishop e7, knight g5, h6, bishop e3, bishop d7, knight d2, e5, f4, knight g4, attacking this guy to try to get more control over dark squares. h3, happily taking this one. And yeah, it doesn't matter if white plays this move because this is quite annoying with the bishop hanging. So he played rook e1, knight e5. Yeah, black is -3 evaluation, so it's a very nice position. And yeah, it's 2 pawns up, very centralized knight, super strong control over dark squares, and the position is playing itself basically. All right, so that's it. That's the second part of the Morra Gambit, and I definitely learned something from this. I think my maneuvers trying to take the light squared bishop was interesting, that it didn't work very well. Also the option of playing g6 in many positions, and also when to develop the bishop to g4 and when to just keep it on c8 and play e6. I think those are the biggest takeaways for me. And yeah, so thank you very much, and maybe I will do a part 3 of the Morra Gambit because I really enjoy those themed symbols. Okay, thank you guys. I don't know if anyone saw the stream, but because Steffi had some problems here with the internet connection, I think. Okay, thank you very much, and see you again perhaps for part 3.